Okay, so we're doing week 10. This is the week 10 lecture. This week is on culture. Native Americans and Somalis are kind of the examples of that. We're talking about cultural assimilation, health literacy a little bit as well, but the big thing this week is cultural assimilation, kind of identity, self identity, that sort of stuff that a lot of our clients are dealing with around issues around that common kind of thing. These are the lecture questions for this week. Need to know all these. One or more of these may be on the final exam. So first looking at Native American tribes and culture within Maine. This is probably the biggest cultural difference in Maine, along with the Somalis. There's more immigrant groups kind of moving into Maine. The Native Americans, we're kind of the immigrant group to them. They've been here forever, as everybody knows. In Maine, they're kind of aligned around this Wabanaki Confederacy, kind of a political alliance, began in the 1990s, early 90s. It involves Maine, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick as well. And within that Wabanaki Confederacy are these different tribes and reservations in Maine. I didn't know much about this, didn't really know much about this growing up in Maine, in western Maine. I didn't know that there was reservations in Maine. But there definitely is. I think there's more history of that in the schools locally now. Definitely a lot of Native American cultural and history in Maine, and definitely it's a big cultural shift when you're working with this population as a therapist, as I experienced, some of which is in that story, working with clients on Indian Island or the Penobscot Island, Indian Island Reservation in Old Town. So the tribes in Maine, you need to know all of these tribes for the exam. I'll repeat that, you need to know all of these tribes for the exam. And they're tricky little names, you have to kind of know them all. There's the Micmac, which is up in the county, Aroostook County, Presque Isle, way up there. Penobscot, ones that the story refers to, island life in Old Town, right in here, up in Old Town, right outside of Orono. And then the Maliseet, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, Maliseet. There's a reservation up in Holton, again up in Aroostook County. And then there's the Passamaquoddy. They have two locations in Washington County. They have a big presence in Washington County, the Passamaquoddy tribes. The history of the Native Americans in Maine, as it is in other parts of the country, is very much a history of discrimination. Ever since white European culture started to clash with Native Americans, it hasn't really been a pretty picture. In Maine, I know they used to have bounties on the heads of a lot of these folks from these tribes, trying to literally exterminate them and get rid of them. They were forced relocation, so they had to leave their villages and homes and move to these reservations. They outlawed Native European dominant cultures, outlawed a lot of the cultural practices of Native Americans around clothes, and they outlawed their language, so they kind of lost their clothes and their language. The government / Catholic Church played a big role in the forced removal of a lot of Indian children to white families. They wanted, if Indian children was an orphan or was up for an adoption, they made sure that it was raised by a white family. In some cases, they took the children away from Native families and put them into white families. And this is kind of a lingering thing in Maine, a lot of still anger and resentment over this if you talk to natives about this. And these laws really weren't even taken off the books in Maine until the late 1990s. Orphaned natives legally had to be adopted by a white family as late as 1995, which is kind of shocking. They lost their hunting grounds, which is kind of how they survived, and the whole culture kind of survived. Polluted rivers lost diet. Great example is Penobscot tribe, the Penobscot River, which runs through Bangor and runs down through Old Town. Huge, beautiful river. Penobscot were river people. They kind of lived on the river, the seasons of the river. They moved with the river, and they lived off the fishing with their canoes off the river. But when the river was polluted from the paper mills, they kind of lost their diet. They lost that fish diet, and there's a lot of long-standing uh, kind of damages to that, or long-term kind of implications of what that did to their whole livelihood, their culture, and especially the diet. They kind of shifted more to a Western diet, and that led to a lot of modern health issues around diabetes and heart disease. Like I said, there's a lot of residual anger. There was this survey that was done in 2012 asking natives in Maine what they kind of felt, what was some of their issues. And they said that there was a lot of residual anger to the white culture over lost traditions, lost language, loss of land, a lot of mistrust, it's kind of a lost trust with white cultures of everything that's been done to them over these generations, really. A lot of health issues. The natives in Maine kind of talked about that. They're complicated. It almost, I've read stuff where dietitians have said that the native bodies have not adjusted to the Western culture, Western diet, which, the high-fat diet that we love as Americans and Europeans going way back. Again, they were all fish and grains, and then all this big shift to this high-fat diet seemed to have really done a number on their bodies and how they were kind of evolved, leading to the heart disease and tremendous amount of diabetes in native cultures. High blood pressure, it's 32% higher with natives compared to non-natives in Maine. High cholesterol, diabetes, alcoholism, big issue around native cultures. Depression, obesity, because we relate to the diet again. So they have a lot of health issues. So as therapists, I know as a therapist working in this area, you're seeing a lot of folks that are natives or have a degree of Native American in them, because it seems to go hand in hand, these health issues. So when they have health issues, you have diabetes and heart disease, they're having strokes, that sort of thing, their need occupational therapy. Kind of shifting to this idea of cultural assimilation, and the natives, Americans in Maine, have assimilated to a large degree, but not fully, into our culture, the dominant culture. What is this? What are we talking about? Cultural assimilation is the process by which a person or a group's language and or culture comes to resemble those of another dominant group. They kind of subsumed within the dominant group. They kind of give up a lot of their practices and ways and take on the practices, the culture of the dominant group. This is when full assimilation happens. It occurs when the new members of a society become indistinguishable from members of the other group. They're kind of blending in as much as they can. This is really the story of America. It's happened over and over again. Different immigrant groups merging into the American culture and becoming assimilated to a degree. For immigrants, natives, it's a balancing. It's really, you got to see this as a balancing kind of thing. This is where the conflict comes up and a lot of the issues between loss of self-identity and gaining of acceptance and financial success. And in this country, there's a lot of financial opportunities to become part of the culture. But what's the cost to that? You kind of lost your identity, kind of where you came from, what you've always known. You lost maybe potentially your religion, your community, language, cultural identity. The story of the nurse, Native American nurse, she's a great example of that, as we'll talk about later. Another example of that is the Somalis in Lewiston, Maine. Maybe you're familiar with that. There's a large Somali community in Lewiston, Maine. Similar story that's going on in Lewiston. A lot of these mill towns in Maine. A lot of these mills were built by immigrants, and the immigrants kind of worked them, the French Canadians, the Irish, the Lithuanians, Germans. And they came in and they didn't speak the language, and they had a foreign religion too. At the time it was Catholic. If you were Catholic, you were very different compared to the Protestant. So they had a hard time, Italians, immigrating, assimilating into the culture, but eventually it happened, and we don't even distinguish the difference at this point. The Somalis, there was a lot of fear and anxiety and protest over this. but it's really been a success story for the most part. Really no increase in crime in Lewiston. They've really, a lot of the Somalis folks have really fit a need in the Lewiston area, a need in Maine. Maine, as you probably know, is the oldest state in the country. So there's this huge and growing need for people to take care of the old, the elderly. As the boomers age, there's nobody young to take care of them. Somalis are kind of filling that gap. A lot of these jobs in healthcare, home health aides, that sort of thing. Local businesses, Lewiston, I don't know if you've been through that area or are familiar with it, but it's it hasn't been exactly an economically thriving area. Certain parts of the city kind of grew up out that way. I'm familiar with it. And the Somalis have opened up businesses and kind of got it going economically. It's been a good thing that way. And the whole community has really kind of shifted to a large degree from kind of anger and protest to acceptance. And the Somalis have become assimilated to a degree within the culture. It's kind of been a success story, really a common success story for this country in Maine. Looking at solutions, things that happen in Somali and Lewiston, Somalians, and then with the Native Americans in Maine. Alan Saka Basin, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's written some really great books about his experience as a part of the Passamaquoddy reservation down east. He does a lot of stuff at local schools around Native music and cultural traditions. He's really helped kind of increase awareness of Native issues for folks like myself, Native Mainers, kind of who aren't that familiar with it. Another way that Somali culture became more accepted within the dominant culture in the city of Lewiston and Maine has been, interesting enough, through sports. Particularly the soccer team at Lewiston High School, the Lewiston High School soccer team has been very successful, and it became very successful when a lot of the Somali immigrants started taking part in the team and their background in soccer and all that sort of stuff. So the two groups, this is a great picture, kind of came together for a common cause, the soccer team. The stories this week were very much about assimilation, identity, those kinds of issues. One was a more traditional cultural thing. One was a little bit more different, but it's definitely around the issues of identity. That's with the Beautiful Eye story, kind of transgender issues. I know when I saw Ross, the client, portrayed in the story, it definitely was eye-opening to me, more awareness, trying to become more aware of transgender issues growing up. Again, almost like the Native Americans, it's just something we were not aware of, we did not know about, different generation kind of thing. So that awareness, education, sensitivity, empathy, all those things are great things that we've kind of moved more towards, and great things we need to have as OTs as we're working with our clients. With Ross, he was struggling with a lot of things. Definitely the sexual identity was a big issue he was dealing with in his life. I think that kind of manifested in his health in a lot of different ways. Also the burns. You'll be dealing with a lot of patients that have had horrific burns. And the scarring from the burns can really mess with your identity, how you look, how the world reacts to how you look, your appearance, which is a big part of identity. He was dealing with the burns and sexual identity at the same time. I think the fact that the part of the story talks about his father, and his father never really accepted who he was in terms of his sexual identity, that had a big lasting emotional scarring on Ross. Definitely the cost of sexual identity conflicting with social norms. This is how I am. Where do I fit within this world? Is there a place for me within this world? That disconnect, along with the physical deformity, I think really did a number on him in a lot of different ways. You could say he's another good example of the ACE scores, dealing with that as a child and kind of manifesting it later on in health issues. I'm not sure he was happy in terms of really wanting to even be alive. He was almost passively suicidal in a lot of ways with his abusive drinking and abusive behaviors. A very complicated kind of situation. I think looking back at that situation with him, and when I saw him, it was quite a while ago, I think we all could have done a lot better job as our health team going in there, working with him. I think I could have done a better job, that's for sure. More awareness, more issues around counseling, I think would have helped him. More goals that were particular important to him, coping strategies around appearance, more acceptance and support of that, of just the challenges around transgender issues. I felt like he's done a tremendous more, a lot better job. I think it's a good example of kind of what not to do, and the potential of doing the right thing can have that much more of an impact on your client, a positive impact on your client in terms of goal setting and interventions. And I wasn't that successful. And I think part of the reason I wasn't that successful, and really the whole health team was not that successful, because we didn't really understand Ross and come at it from his level, his view of the world versus our kind of limited understanding of what he was kind of going through. Another good example of that, the cultural assimilation, was Teresa with the island life. And that's kind of an indirect OT story, but I thought she was kind of a fascinating character, the stuff that she was going through. She's kind of a compilation of more than one character. Definitely talks about my experiences on the island. It was weird because being like a white male, and especially growing up for the most part in Maine, you don't really even think of those things as being different. I mean, you think about it, but you don't really ever experience it emotionally. But when I go up there, and when I went up there to see patients, I definitely felt it. I definitely experienced it. Particularly, I remember going into the clinic, their health clinic there, and there's all this native cultural stuff. Everybody there waiting in the clinic is native. All the healthcare professionals there are native. And I'm the only kind of white guy, and you kind of stick out, and it makes you very self-conscious of yourself. Kind of a good experience, in a sense, for all of us to kind of increase our awareness. But with Teresa, she, like a lot of folks on the island, she's conflicted between those two worlds. And it kind of is symbolic of the island life. On the island, on the reservations, folks that live there, they stay on the island primarily and go to school on the island until they reach high school. And then when they reach high school, they have to go to the Old Town High School or a different high school. She went to John Baptist, I believe it was. They can choose which high school they want. Most of them go to the Old Town High School. And this is where the disconnect happens. A lot of the native folks, they kind of stick to themselves, and they're not, the degree of acceptance, it's just very, very challenging to assimilate at that point. She really went for it, assimilated fully at John Baptist High School, was accepted to a degree. I mean, she always kind of felt different, as she talks about. But that kind of came, and then she went to college and got a good job and seemed to be doing all the right things. But it came at a cost, and it was kind of a lingering impact on her, I think, in a lot of ways. She definitely lost her friends, her connections, her identity to a degree. They kind of thought she was better than them, going off to college, going off to almost like a prep school at John Baptist. She reaped the benefits of the education, of the career, financially doing something that was meaningful to her, going back to the island and helping folks out. But in a lot of ways, she didn't make that adjustment in kind of a healthy way. I think it still kind of lingered, almost like an ACE score kind of thing. She kind of went too far, kind of breaking nursing ethics, kind of code of conduct. In a sense, she was unable to fully assimilate into that world, and she kind of couldn't escape her past. I think her past kind of came back to haunt her in a lot of ways. I think she was also very conflicted in terms of what had happened to her son with the cancer, and the pain he went through, not wanting other people to go through that kind of pain. At that time in healthcare, that was the issue. A lot of folks, because of insurances or whatever, could not afford the pain meds. It's an awful thing. Should somebody go through that? I could think, taking her side of things, I think you could, make an argument for doing what she did. I mean, it was unethical and it cost her job, but it's a hard thing to kind of watch somebody go through what she had to. Okay, and then lastly, health literacy. I know you've had some on this. It's always good to kind of have a little more on this. This is kind of stuff I think I'm probably going to come back on the board exam. Really important stuff, OT-wise. Really prevalent problem. Half the adult population has some degree of health literacy. that they can't read, they can't understand what the doctor is saying to them. And I think I've said this before. A lot of cases we're kind of the translator of what the doctor said. They don't dare ask questions, but they do ask the therapist. The doctor said this, what does it mean, kind of thing. Poor health literacy is a poor predictor of health. We have to really educate our clients, work at their level, kind of these empathy themes we're talking about, understand the world as they see the world. I know, like with Native American cultures, this probably can really get compounded. And there's a lot of, when I've been up, there's a lot of distrust. Definitely a non-acceptance of Western medicines. They don't like Western medicines. Some of the folks up there, they're a little more accepting of therapy because it's a kind of a simple concept, work hard to get better kind of thing. But to get the trust and get them to accept me to come into their homes, very challenging at times, and get them to kind of continue with the therapy. Individuals with poor health literacy are the largest consumers of health services. So you're going to be running into this right off the bat. And it's good to be really, really aware of it, because it may not, be glaring you in the face, but it's going to be there to a degree. Solutions, key elements of conversing, strategies for health literacy deficits. I think you've heard this before, but kind of breaking the complex down into understandable pieces, organizing information for the most important ones first, open-ended versus yes/no questions, teach back, return demonstration. That's kind of your biggest thing. I think some good examples of this have been the home health practicums with the 10 patient with Shelley. She's been very good at simulating a real patient. I think a lot of students have kind of struggled with that. I think you're struggling with that because it's the first time you're kind of dealing with that. And you just kind of remember what you need to know, but versus dealing with this person that's not listening to you for whatever reason. But I think she's a good example of health literacy. And she's a good example of what to do, what a lot of students are kind of struggling to do. Slowing down, breaking things down into little steps, trying to set the tone versus having her just kind of roll through things and do things unsafe. Demonstration. Demonstration. That is a key thing, I think. Show it to them first versus just talking and having them do it. Talking with a lot of clients, older clients with health literacy issues, that only gets you so far. The more you can demonstrate to them and then have them do it, correct them, demonstrate again, and have them do it again until they get it. Even if it's just one or two things for a whole session, a lot more beneficial than just running through a lot of things incompletely, unsafely kind of thing. So health literacy has a lot of ways, it manifests in a lot of ways, and the way you're going to see it the most is people just are not going to understand the ramifications of their unsafe actions. And they kind of need to be taught in a slow, simple kind of way on how to do that. Okay, so simulation lab's coming up Thursday. We're going to do that all in class. And then homework 8, do 4, 5.